Good morning. My name is Alexis Miller, and I'm the Director of Communications at the Executive Council Office for the Government of Yukon. Thank you for joining us today. This is the Government of Yukon's 8th technical briefing on the heap leach failure that occurred at the Eagle Gold Mine on June 24th, 2024. Our goal remains to openly and transparently communicate with the public about the work that has been done to date by the Government of Yukon to protect the health and safety of Yukoners and the environment in response to the heap leach failure at Victoria Gold's mine. Should you have questions that cannot be addressed by these subject matters experts, or if we do not have the time to answer all your questions today, feel free to reach out to Jordan Owens with Cabinet Communications at jordan.owens@yukon.ca, and she will be happy to direct your questions to the appropriate department. On behalf of the Government of Yukon, I want to say that we appreciate that many people have questions and concerns about the situation. As this situation continues to develop, we won't have all the answers yet, but these hardworking folks are here to share what we do know today. I understand that this briefing is being live streamed by news outlets, and I'd like to welcome members of the public who are joining us as well. The Yukon government will post a recording of this briefing on Facebook later today. We are also regularly updating yukon.ca Victoria Gold online hub, which you can find at yukon.ca/Victoria-Gold-updates. I would now like to introduce the speakers and technical experts here today. There will be some introductory comments before opening the floor to questions. From the Department of Energy, Mines and Resources, we are joined by Minister John Stryker and Deputy Minister Lauren Haney, as well as Aaron Dowd, the Manager of Major Mine Licensing. From the Department of Environment, we are joined again by Water Resources Scientist Tyler Williams and Senior Fisheries Biologist Cameron Sinclair. We will start with Minister Stryker for some opening comments.
Thanks, Alexis. Morning, everybody. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the traditional territories of the Kwanlin First Nation and the Ta'an Quechan Council. Today, we're once again discussing an important matter involving the traditional territory of the First Nation of Natchenak-Dun. We're now 8 weeks out from the failure of the heap leach facility at Victoria Gold's Eagle Gold Mine, and this is, as Alexis noted, our 8th media briefing. It's also 3 weeks since the tragic accident of our colleague and champion of the environment, Michael Prochaska. And I just wanted to let folks know out there that Minister Clark is on the mend, and he's getting better, and we hope to have him back in the office sometime soon. I'm sure for all Yukoners, our love and thoughts go out to Krista and the family. This past week has been a critical point in our response to the heap leach failure, as it immediately follows a court-appointed receiver taking over the Eagle Gold mine site. We've been working diligently to support this transition. To be clear and to restate what Minister McPhee said last week, the court order appoints PricewaterhouseCoopers as the receiver, meaning they are responsible for administering the assets and liabilities formerly under the control of Victoria Gold under the supervision of the court. I want to thank organizations like CPAWS Yukon, Yukon Conservation Society, the Yukon Chamber of Commerce for their supportive messages to us about the receivership over the past week. It's important to note that we are currently in a legislated appeal period over the court's decision. Because of this, there are certain areas where we are limited in what we can share today. We recognize and respect the need for due diligence while this legal process unfolds, and we look forward to sharing more information with Yukoners once the appeal period has passed. As the Premier and I have said previously, the Government of Yukon supports convening an independent review board to investigate the cause of the June 24th heap leach failure. The independent review process is outlined under Section 3.2.3 of the Mine Waste Facilities Management Guidelines. The Government of Yukon believes that this process is the most direct path to uncovering the causes of the heap leach failure and identifying lessons learned. We are currently in discussions with world-class experts who are interested in serving on this panel. And as we've said, the aim of the review will be to get to the heart of what happened at Victoria Gold's mine site on June 24th, to prevent it from occurring again and to use these insights to improve our regulatory and licensing practices moving forward. I know many of you will be interested in the timeline for the Independent Review Board. In July, Yukon government officials sent draft terms of reference for the Independent Review Board to the First Nation of Notchanaga for their review and feedback. Those terms of reference were finalized this week. We have identified potential board members and are working through final contracting details with them. We anticipate being able to announce the names of board members and sharing more information about the Independent Review Board next week. As I stated earlier, I'm limited in what I can say today as an elected official due to the appeal period for the receivership. However, I know that our technical team have valuable information to share about environmental mitigation and the efforts taking place on the mine site. We all share a profound commitment to this land, its future, and the well-being of future generations. As always, our government remains focused on the urgent need to protect people and the environment at and around the Eagle Gold Mine site and to keep Yukoners informed about our progress in responding to the failure. And Alexis, before I pass it back over to you and then on to others today, I just want to say thanks to all of the folks working incredibly hard over the past, well, tomorrow will be 2 months. I just want to say publicly that the teams at Energy, Mines and Resources and Environment, Health and Social Services, and Chief Hope has shared with me as well about how hard the teams at the folks from Victoria Gold, from the First Nation of Notchanaga have been working, and PricewaterhouseCoopers has said to us that they're impressed with the staff that are there on site. Everybody has been working incredibly hard over the past 2 months. And for all of that work, I'd like to say thank you. Thanks, Alexis.
Thank you, Minister. I'll now pass it on to the manager of Major Mine Licensing, Aaron Dowd.
Hi, good morning. My name is Aaron Dowd, and I'm the technical lead on the Eagle Gold response with the Department of Energy, Mines and Resources. With the receivership in place, the remediation efforts can proceed. The receiver, PricewaterhouseCoopers, and the lead environmental consultant, Parsons, are moving quickly and making decisions that reflect the urgency of this situation and the need to implement immediate action to address the environmental and human health and safety risks at site. Our technical team met earlier this week with the receiver and their lead environmental consultant, and we presented the work of our technical team to date, confirmed the priorities for the site, and discussed how execution plans will be informed and developed. Those priorities areas remain increasing the available water storage, ensuring water treatment systems are able to discharge water safely, installing groundwater monitoring and interception wells, and addressing stability of the heap. Work is underway to install 5 groundwater monitoring wells at site in locations far enough away from the slide area that it is safe to do that work. Our contractor, Core Geo, is doing this work. Peli Construction is being mobilized to start work on the berm and is its access road in the coming days. The team is taking precautions to help protect the workers building the berm, and that includes having adequate on-site monitoring to detect any movement and appropriate responses if movement is detected. As well, we are exploring safe locations for additional water storage for contaminated water on site, and we plan to build additional storage ponds as the site does not currently have enough water storage capacity to manage all the contaminated water expected to be required over the coming months. We are also working to ensure that on-site water treatment systems are sufficient to meet the water license requirements and be protective of the environment. Parsons, the First Nation of Notchanaga, and Yukon government representatives have met this week to discuss water treatment on site And the focus of these discussions is ensuring adequate water treatment methods are in place.
Thank you, Erin. I'll now pass it on to Tyler Williams, a water resources scientist.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name is Tyler Williams. I'm a water resources scientist with Department of Environment's Water Resources Branch. I will give an update today on the most recent water sample results that we have available to us at this time. Before I get into the results, I want to explain a bit about the water diversion pipe that was installed in Dublin Gulch. Following the failure and prior to August 8, a diversion pipe carried clean water from upstream of the mine site, around the failure, and into Dublin Gulch. This water was then mixing with highly contaminated groundwater surfacing in Dublin Gulch and resulted in high levels of cyanide detected in surface water samples collected from Dublin Gulch. This was the main source of elevated levels of cyanide that were being observed in Haggart Creek since the failure. As of August 8th, under an inspector's direction, the diversion pipe was extended directly into Haggart Creek, bypassing Dublin Gulch. This is an important step in the process of keeping clean water away from sources of contamination and mitigating the impacts of the heap leach failure on the downstream environment. Now that the diversion pipe has been extended, we can already see that this mitigation measure has had a significant positive impact on the levels of cyanide that we are observing in Haggart Creek. The results that I can share today are the first set that have come back since the extension of the diversion pipe. From August 9 to 15, we observed much lower concentrations of cyanide at all the surface water monitoring locations in Haggart Creek. 80% of samples received during this period have been non-detect for WAD cyanide. Now, on the graph shown on the screen, we can see the levels of cyanide observed at two of the monitoring sites, W29 and W99, which are both located in Haggart Creek downstream of the mine site. And I'll walk us through this graph a little bit. So on the vertical axis there is WAD cyanide concentrations, milligrams per liter. The non-detect results plotted at the bottom. And the two horizontal dashed lines there are the BC acute and chronic aquatic life guidelines, which we've been talking about in past weeks. You've got month and date on the horizontal axis at the bottom there. So starting around when the heap leach failure occurred up to current date. And there's two periods highlighted there. The gray area is when the water treatment plant was discharging, and the vertical dashed line is the finalization of the Dublin Gulch diversion extension, which I just talked about. So when you look at the results, the two sites there, the two different colors, the dots are the data that's come in from daily sampling. And we can see in late June and early July, most of the results were non-detect for cyanide. This then increased through mid-July up to a point where it stabilized around the chronic aquatic life guidelines. And then that was briefly interrupted by the water treatment period with the high cyanide spikes. But then immediately following the extension of the Dublin Gulch diversion, you see that the cyanide concentrations go back down to very low and non-detect results that have remained that way to our most recent results on August 15th. I want to stress that while we are seeing decreased levels of cyanide in our most recent results, this is still a dynamic situation that always has potential to change. We are continuing to collect daily samples from monitoring locations in Haggart Creek and the South McQuestion River, according to our water monitoring and reporting plan. Water monitoring results for each day and sampling location can be found online at yukon.ca/victoria-gold-updates. I will now pass it over to Cameron to give a brief update on the fish situation. Thank you.
Thanks, Tyler. Good morning, everyone. My name is Cameron Sinclair. I'm the Senior Fisheries Biologist with Environment. I'm going to provide a brief update on the fisheries and aquatic programs this week. To start, I want to confirm that the 68 dead fish found in Haggart Creek following the discharge are now in the possession of Environment and Climate Change Canada. And we are working with them to gain access to those fish, to scan them for tags, determine the number of Arctic grayling and slimy sculpin and other species that may be in that collection. In addition, an aquatic life monitoring program has also begun as developed by technical experts with the First Nation of Natchanaga, the Department of Environment, federal departments, and technical consultants. So this program focuses on sampling aquatic insects for abundance and as well as collecting tissue samples for metal analysis in Haggard Creek, both upstream and downstream of the mine. These bottom-dwelling aquatic insects have stable life cycles that can reveal trends and shifts in environmental quality when monitored, and they're really sort of the foundation of the food chain, of the aquatic food chain. Combined, the fisheries and aquatic programs are continue to be aimed at providing us with an overview of how these populations may change over time, including if they are infected or affected by heavy metals. The reduction in cyanide levels that Tyler presented continues to be encouraging and really points to the importance of our monitoring program as well as the consequences of contaminated water above the guidelines that we've been mentioning. We'll provide brief updates on yukon.ca as we collect more information. That's all the update that I have today. Thanks.
Thank you for your updates. I will now open the floor to questions. In the interest of fairness, we will begin by giving each reporter one question and one follow-up. If possible, please keep your question concise and identify to whom your question is directed. We will begin with reporters in the room and then turn to reporters joining remotely. For those of you joining online, please indicate in the chat if you have a question you'd like to ask, and please identify your name and media outlet. We will begin with Catherine from CBC.
This is a question for Minister Stryker. Is the plan to pay for environmental remediation through the eventual sale of the mine site?
Sorry, can you just repeat the question for me?
Is the plan to pay for the environmental remediation that's happening now through revenue gained from the sale of the mine site down the road?
I think I'll start, Lauren, and then I think the plan for us right now is to support the receiver. And if there are assets there within the mine site itself, then that's what will go first towards the payment of this. But in order for us as a government to support the court order, we had to supply $50 million. Okay, all of that is a question to be resolved because, of course, we don't know the answers around how much asset the mining company had or how much cash the mining company had at the time. So that's one of the things that the receiver will work on right now. And that's where we'll start. And we will just, once we get that information, then we'll resolve it from there. I don't know if you want to.
I'll just emphasize that the purpose of the receivership is remediation. So it is to clean up the failure and its impacts. So unlike some other receivership situations that are more focused on sale of the main property or assets, this one is primarily, it is focused on remediation. And just to clarify, so as part of the court materials, we put forward a cost estimate over the next few months, this very intense period we've talked about, to freeze up of requiring up to around $50 million. And $15 million was fronted to the receiver. So Yukon government is funding the receivership, and what was critical to ensure that PwC and the lead environmental consultant could act immediately was ensuring it had funds available to it. But as the minister said, part of their job under court supervision is to look for available assets from the company to use for the remediation work.
Did you have a follow-up?
Yeah, so in court documents, you state that you were empowered to use security once Victoria Gold failed to take an inspector's direction. I'm just wondering why you haven't taken that step, given that the plan is to, avoid taxpayers from fronting those costs.
Yeah.
So that is an option potentially available to Yukon government to elect to draw on the surety bonds that form the security we required for the site. Part of the decision there is there are two distinct pieces. There is the remediation, we're calling it, and that is to do with the failure and its impacts. And that is the focus of the receivership and the immediate work being done on site. Second to that, separate from that, is reclamation and closure of the mine site. So these are two distinct paths. The goal right now isn't to proceed with reclamation and closure. That estimate of around $104 million and the security that we hold for the project was based on the conditions and liability of the site prior to the failure event.
Thank you. We'll now go to Stuart from Shonafem.
I'm not entirely certain who's going to be the best to address this. I think it's probably going to be Aaron Dowd. I'm guessing that the answer is going to be, we don't know for sure yet. Do we have an approximate timeline for remediation at the site?
You guessed right. We don't know that yet, but that's part of the work that we're doing right now is finalizing those plans and determining what we have to do.
Okay, so assuming then that remediation is going to take longer than the next couple months before the snow starts to fly, what action can be taken before the snow starts falling to make the job a little bit easier in the spring?
It's a good question. There's a lot of work that we'll have to do prior to freeze up. And part of the work we're doing this week and next week is looking at what has to be winterized, what activities have to be prioritized so that we can prepare ourselves for that. And that's part of getting adequate water storage in place to prepare for freshet conditions in the spring, making sure our diversions are sufficient for storm events and all of that. So we're doing that work so that we're prepared for winter conditions and also prepared for the spring melt.
Stuart, can I just build on Aaron's answer just to help Yukoners to try and understand? One of the places that we really need to get to is the groundwater. And so we're starting some of those groundwater wells, which are closer to Hager Creek, which are in a zone that is safe to do it. But where we're really trying to get to is just below the slide. Okay, so we have to build a berm to protect, to put those wells in. Once we start to get that information, it'll help us to understand what we're up against and how long it's going to take to address.
Thank you. We'll now move to reporters online. We'll start with Blair, the Northern Miner.
Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yep. Sorry, Blair. You're coming in a little bit quiet. We're just trying to turn up the
Okay.
volume.
All right. Is this better now?
Yes, perfect. Go ahead.
Okay. Is there any, maybe like 6 weeks ago, there was talk about previous charges the company faced as a result of past water management issues. Is there any talk now about pressing new charges against the company for this latest accident?
Hi, Blair, I can answer that. So we don't have updates on any potential additional enforcement action against Victoria Gold at this time pertaining to water or other issues.
Did you have a follow-up, Blair?
I do. Yes. So this might be a bit early to talk about this, but considering this has impacted so many people in the territory, including First Nations groups, and water and everything else, is there any sense that this will spur an even stricter approach to mining legislation and regulations going forward in terms of creating new policy?
Thanks for the question, Blair. Right now, we're in the middle of developing new minerals legislation, working with First Nation governments. This has been an in-depth work that's been in place because the legislation is pretty antiquated. And I definitely think that we want to make sure that we're considering this failure and learning lessons from it as we develop that legislation. I don't want to speak for First Nations, but I think all Yukoners will be looking at this, trying to understand how we need or what we need from our legislation in order to make sure that we have safe and responsible mining going forward.
If I can add to just getting back to the importance of the independent review board process, we don't yet know the causes. And critical to understanding whether there need to be changes made to legislation, policy, or practice is understanding what happened. That's a key first step. And while our legislation and the framework of it is certainly antiquated, we do have some robust policy and practices around licensing and regulating mines, including our mine waste facilities management. Do I have that right? Mine waste management facilities guidelines. Thank you. Which were released a year or two ago and actually in use by other jurisdictions.
Thank you. We'll now move to Ashley, the Canadian Press.
Hi, I'm sorry. I'm wondering if Tyler can explain the diversion pipe bypass again. I don't quite have my head wrapped around how it works and why it seems to have such a had a significant impact on the lower cyanide levels.
Yes, thanks. So yeah, prior to this diversion pipe extension, water from upstream of the site was going into lower Dublin Gulch and it was mixing with contaminated water. So now that the pipe's been extended, the pipe goes directly into Haggart Creek, and that contaminated groundwater is now surfacing and pooling in a dry creek bed in Dublin Gulch. And so, and additionally to that, an additional check dam was built right before where Dublin Gulch enters into Haggart Creek. So that water is now captured. It's being pumped into trucks and sent back to water management ponds. And further to that, now that the creek bed is mainly dry, the field staff are able to observe where that groundwater is seeping up, and we're waiting for results back to determine exactly where the source of that contaminated water is. But yeah, the idea there is that now it's exposed, it can be captured, and it can be sent to water management ponds, and so it avoids going into Haggart Creek.
Great, thank you. And I know that the estimate was put at $50 million for the cost for the first couple months. Do we have a more global number for how much we think this is going to cost? Because it doesn't sound like it's going to be, cleaned up and ready to go in a couple months.
So as part of the court filing, I'll say I want to emphasize that the $50 million estimate is a preliminary estimate, and that the important work that the receiver and the lead environmental consultant are doing in close collaboration with Yukon government experts, as well as the experts of the First Nation of Nacho-Naik-Dun, is to refine these estimates. What we also submitted with the court material was again, very preliminary estimate of $100 to $150 million cleanup scenario. But as I say, our work right now is to develop a concrete plan for remediation. There's the immediate term work, which is reflected in the inspector's direction and which now is being undertaken. And then there's the longer term remediation items. We talk a lot about working really hard to freeze up, and that's absolutely true. It's also true that work can continue through the winter. It becomes more difficult, but mine sites are operated across the north and remediation projects across the north all through the winter. So those estimates will continue to be refined.
And Ashley, we also have PricewaterhouseCoopers and Parsons now on site, and they will help as well because they're bringing their expertise to bear at refining that analysis about what it's going to cost going forward. So and now that they're on site doing that work, they're going to add to the work that the technical teams from NND and the Yukon government have been putting toward this.
Thank you. We'll now move to Taylor, Yukon News.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Talar Stockton, and I'm from the Yukon News. My question mainly goes to Aaron. I was wondering, you gave a really great description of the plans that are happening. I'm just wondering what is happening right now on the site. What is PwC, what is Parsons doing right now on the site?
So this week we saw groundwater wells begin to be constructed on site. And that's, as the minister said, one of our primary focuses is getting a better understanding of groundwater and capturing that water if necessary. We're also on site looking at where water storage ponds can be constructed and lining up the necessary resources to do that. Looking at the additional diversion structures that are required, and as well as investigating the water treatment options. So for work on the ground that occurred this week, it's groundwater wells. And what's expected to occur over the next week is the beginning of the berm and the road to increase our health and safety on site, and as well getting ready to do our water storage ponds.
Thank you. I have no follow-up questions.
Thank you. We'll now go to Niall, the Globe and Mail.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Great, thanks for that. What can you say about the stability of the pile that's left on site and the risk of another slide and more contamination?
I think that what we can say is the stability of that heap is still a primary concern of ours. And the reason why we are constructing that berm is to control any secondary failures of that facility. So if another failure were to occur, we would have a protection in place that would help contain any of that. So the work that's being done on site right now is really getting a true understanding of the stability, our monitoring in place, and what's required for really robust monitoring and response efforts.
And thank you for that. And just in terms of a follow-up, I received an email from John McConnell, and it was sent to, like a lot of people, I don't know how many people saw the email, but it was very short, but he just sort of said he was proud of the work his team had done. Past 15 years had been a blast, and he told people to stay tuned for his next adventure! ! I was just wondering what you guys thought of that email.
I'm sure that when John left, he sent out a wide email to a lot of folks. Yes, I saw the email. Look, really, our focus is on the site. We need to address the issues at hand, and I think that is where we're going to keep our focus right now. And it's about making sure that we protect the environment, and we do it in a way that's going to be safe for the workers on site, so that we don't put them at risk of a slide. I'm just so thankful that in the first slide, no one was killed. And I think we're going to keep our focus there.
Okay.
Thank you. We'll now move to Tim, Yukon Star.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can hear you. Yeah.
Yes, this is sort of in reference to the last question, speaking of John McConnell. Why was there no announcement from either PricewaterhouseCoopers or the government that he had been fired? It already looks like the receivers aren't going to be any more communicative than Yukon Gold or Victoria Gold was.
Thanks for the question. So the business matters of Victoria Gold are the responsibility of the receiver. There's been a lot of work happening in this first, it's only been a week since the week and a day that the receivership was put into place. We won't be commenting on some of those business decisions of PricewaterhouseCoopers. We are speaking with the receiver about communication going forward, recognizing this is a unique situation in that the receivership is focused on remediation.
Did you have a follow-up, Tim?
Well, it would be a follow-up to that. I don't really find that answer acceptable. There was already a lot of trouble with Victoria Gold not talking to the public and the media, and we seem to be starting the same pattern again.
Tim, when we look at the court process, it appoints PricewaterhouseCoopers to deal with the management of the site, and our job in working with them is about the remediation decisions. So that is what the court has talked about, and that's how we'll work with PricewaterhouseCoopers. And we have been working with them, and thanks.
Thank you. Those are all the questions today. Noting we have a bit more time. Did anyone have any follow-up questions? Yep.
Thank you. So this is a question for Minister Stryker or Deputy Minister Haney. In your application and in this briefing, you've emphasized the urgency of the situation, that every day without action increases the risk of significant long-term environmental impacts and remediation costs. I understand a number of Yukon government, Parsons, PricewaterhouseCoopers staff left the site over the course of this past long weekend, and you've also lost a number of Victoria Gold workers. Can you assure Yukoners you have adequate staff to complete the round-the-clock urgent work that needs to be done at the site?
First, we're not aware of significant numbers of people leaving the site, Yukon government or Victoria Gold. Part of selecting a very large firm like PricewaterhouseCoopers as well as Parsons is knowing how much work needs to happen, and those are large companies that can leverage a lot of resources. So they will not have a challenge bringing to bear the resources that are required. On the Yukon government side, we're continuing to staff and resource around what this new situation looks like with the receivership in place.
These people, they're working the last long weekend, of course.
Yep. Yep.
Did you have a follow-up? Sorry, Stuart. I thought I saw your hand up. Sorry. You're good? Okay, perfect. So we'll go online. We have Niall, Globe and Mail.
Yeah. My question is, and I know that you've sort of said in this briefing a few times that remediation is the priority, not a sale of the assets to get back money that Yukon's paying and will pay. I did a bit of reporting earlier in the week, and I spoke to some people, and the feeling was that there may not be a lot of companies interested for various reasons in buying this asset. Yet there is quite a lot of gold left in the mine, about 6 years worth. And this is probably for Lauren, would Yukon be amenable as a major creditor working with PwC to start up the mine at a future point and just have the receiver bring in management and for Yukon to get paid back that way?
It isn't something we've contemplated at this point, but I will say the government is broadly thinking about whether there can be a future for this site. And as we conduct, it's not us conducting remediation anymore, but we continue to direct remediation efforts through Parsons and PwC. And as we're moving forward, we're looking for remediation options that don't preclude a future restart of the mine at some point in the future, but we don't have plans on that front at this point.
Now, can I just add, we don't know what caused the slide. And I think that all of us need to know. And when I say all of us, I don't just mean all of us at this table. I mean Yukoners. And we need to understand what caused the slide. So it's hard to contemplate what the future could be at the site until we understand what has happened. So I think that that's a pretty, I think the making sure that we that the site is remediated and we deal with the environmental risks in a safe way and understanding what caused the slide, all pretty important before we get to those next thoughts.
Thank you. We'll now move to Blair, the Northern Miner.
Yes. The last I heard, about $300,000 has been spent, or the Yukon government has been billed about that amount for work by contractors at the site. Is there any update on how much Yukon government has spent of its own funds, or how much it's been billed for?
We don't have an estimate collectively at this point, but we will provide that information.
Thank you. Are there any more questions before we conclude? Yeah.
I understand that PricewaterhouseCoopers provides weekly financial updates to the Yukon government. I'm wondering what you've learned about the extent of Victoria Gold's finances now that the receiver has assumed control.
So as part of the court appointed process and court supervised process, PwC is required to report to the court on a regular basis all of that information publicly, and until it's disclosed there, we're not at liberty to say.
Okay. That is all the questions today. Please feel free to reach out with any additional questions and we'll do our best to address those in a timely fashion. I would also like to remind everyone that more information on the Government of Yukon's efforts to address the Victoria Gold heap leach failure can be found at yukon.ca/Victoria-Gold-updates. This website is updated throughout the week as more information becomes available. Thank you to our speakers and technical experts and to everyone who joined us today. Have a lovely weekend.